Welcome to the hit show on the Global Enlightenment Radio Network. Yes, that was Jasmine Crowe, my friend, my pal, my buddy. That's my girl. Yeah, Jasmine Crowe singing Invisible String on the Global Enlightenment Radio Network. And Rowena, don't be a Cinderella. Have some fun.
This show is called Don't Be Cinderella, where we talk about your rags to riches story. It was fine until it wasn't, and how did you do that? I also want to spread the message about financial literacy and ending world hunger, poverty, and homelessness through financial literacy. And tonight we have our special guests. We have Don Best, the author of The Grave Digger's Dream, and his lovely wife, Betty. Hello, Don. Hi. Betty.
Hi.
Hey.
How you doing, Rowena?
Doing great.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for coming on the show.
Our pleasure, yeah.
Don, what inspired you to be a writer?
Well, and I think with a lot of people, it was a teacher early on. Grades. My grades in high school and earlier even are indication of where you need to be headed, and so I always got good grades in English and the social studies, and not so great in science and math. Around my freshman year in high school, an English composition teacher called me in after class, and I always got A's, and she said, so I would have been like, 17 years old. She said, I really like your writing. You should think about writing. You should, as a path forward. And so she she had a big influence on me. And actually, I was writing at that age, already writing on my own even, and have been ever since. And now I'm a more seasoned guy, as you can see. So yeah, it was a teacher, and I think that's probably true of a lot of people. And a teacher gives you an early indication. Yeah.
So how did you meet your lovely bride, Betty?
So after college, I was a child of the '60s, and I graduated in the early '70s. I decided to join the Peace Corps. That took me on an adventure that has changed my whole life. Actually, it took me first to Puerto Rico to learn Spanish, then on to Paraguay for a couple years in the Peace Corps, and then a hop over. I had become, by that time, I think you might say, an expatriate. I didn't really envision myself going back to the United States. There's a lot of backstory to it, but ended up in Rio, and through another path, Betty had come to South America, to Brazil, and she was in Rio at the same time, and we ended up working at the same newspaper. I was a journalist working for the Brazil Herald in Rio de Janeiro. And there was this lovely graphic artist who came into the newsroom, and I was working as a finance editor. Actually, I was very interested in economics, and lo and behold, Betty came into the newsroom to do photography work and graphic arts, and so actually we've been working as a team ever since, in one way or another. So
Yeah.
as a
That's
family,
fantastic.
yeah. So we met in Rio at the Brazil Herald, right, Betsy?
Right. I wasn't even planning on being in Rio. Rio was a stop on the way to the Amazon. I was going to get on this boat that I pictured pith helmets and hammocks and so forth to go on my adventure to the Amazon. And the boat broke down. Broke down before it even left the dock. Before that, I'd been in Rio for like a day or two, and went to AP, Associated Press, and UPI, who were with the wired services for those from days of antiquity, and to see if they would buy some photographs of the Amazon in order to help finance my trip. Well, I went to UPI, they said no. I went to, the next address was AP. And this is Rio de Janeiro. This is a place with a population at that time of 7.8 million people. I was exhausted, taken me 2 hours to get over to UPI, and they'd said no. And I just thought, I'm tired, I'm sweaty, it's hot. I'm gonna go back to my friend's apartment. And tomorrow I'll try and figure out where this address is for AP, 25 Rio Branco. And so I got off the bus to get a map to find 25 Rio Branco in this huge sprawling city. At that time, it was over 2,000 square miles. And I got off, looked across the street, and there was a sign that said Rio Branco. And I looked up, and the number was 25. And I'm like, okay. Went in there and talked with the guy from AP. He also said, no, I don't want your pictures. But he said, if you're going to be working in Brazil, you should get a permanent visa. And someone at the Brazil Herald, English language newspaper, can tell you about how to do that. And I'm like, yeah, I'm leaving on a boat. I'm a hippie, I don't care. Well, the boat broke down, and I'm like, I need to get a job. So where did I go? It's just amazing how Brazil seemed to be full of those kinds of, you can call them coincidences if you will, but it was full of those for me. And that's how I met my husband. It was on my way to the Amazon, where we ended up anyway, finally. So.
I see. So are you both fluent in Spanish and in Portuguese?
Well, Spanish was my first language because the Peace Corps trained us in that in Puerto Rico for Paraguay. Paraguay is actually bilingual. It's Spanish and Guarani. So I also got my first taste of indigenous languages. It was enough. It was enough of a challenge to learn Spanish. I did learn, some limited, I guess you'd say, social Guarani, because that's still the heart language of a lot of people in Paraguay. So Spanish was my first language. And then when I moved to Brazil, drawn by their music, by the way, it was like a magnet. Their music is still to this very day. I love Brazilian music, and so when I went to work in Rio, of course, then I had to make the shift from Spanish to Portuguese. They're cousin languages. They're very close, but you have to learn, of course, a new pronunciation. And Betty, I think your first language was French, right?
Yeah, I actually took French for 9 years in public school. I was in an experimental. I started in third grade, an experimental program, and that really helped me with Portuguese. And I fell in love with Portuguese as soon as I heard it. Had an exchange student on the phone with her friend the first time I heard Portuguese, and I looked at my mother and said, "I'm going to learn that language." And now that's what I do for a living. I'm an interpreter and translator for Portuguese English. I love it.
Oh, it's a great language. Portuguese is a great. They call them the Romance languages, right? So that would be French and Italian, Spanish and Portuguese. Maybe I've missed one in there, but Portuguese is a beautiful language. So they call it the Romance language for a reason. It's a beautiful language to write music or poetry or a love letter, or in my case, to write books. And has a different rhythm and cadence than English. And it's very beautiful language. Yeah.
It's got a lot of kachis and
it does. Some people say that Portuguese is a marriage between French and Spanish, right, Betsy? Yeah.
Right. It's written kind of like Spanish, and it sounds somewhat like French. It's got some nasal stuff in it. So yeah. It's just beautiful.
So what was your time like there? What is it like living in Rio de Janeiro?
Well, it's an exciting city. We were young, in our 20s when we met, and to be in Rio, it has beautiful beaches. It's a beautiful city. It's as close as I can compare it to any American city would be San Francisco, because it's right on the Atlantic Ocean. Beautiful beaches. These are warm water beaches where you can really go into the water, and then it rises up into these sort of majestic monoliths, monadnocks they call them, big rocks, and it's very green up in the mountains above it. So it's a beautiful city, and to be young and in love was great. And the city itself it's pretty exciting. Great music, good food. Whole new culture to learn and enjoy.
Yeah. Now Rio has changed a lot since this was, first of all, that was in the 70s. Rio has changed, unfortunately, well, for the better, as far as Brazil has changed for the better as far as governments. It was a military dictatorship at that time. And then now Rio has become a lot more, there's a lot more crime, a lot more violent crime. Even on the beaches, you're not safe. And even back in the 70s, I was robbed a few times, once at gunpoint. So I can't do a travel recommendation to Rio without a whole lot of caveats. But there are other places in Brazil I would go to first.
Yeah, the big cities in Brazil, unfortunately, have become quite violent. That has to do mainly, I would say, with the drug culture and the gangs associated with the drug culture. There are other elements, of course, to that, but
yeah, there's a lot, of course, has to do with the family too. There's dads who don't stick around, that kind of thing, or dads who have unabashedly several wives and kid, families all over the place and don't really care. So
So are you saying that it was better when it was under dictatorship, or
Well,
what are the differences? What was it like living in a dictatorship?
well, the dictatorship is one factor. I lived twice under dictatorships. First, when I went to Paraguay, it was Alfredo Stroessner, and then I moved from one dictatorship to another, where General Ernesto Geisel was ruling Brazil. So that's that's not a good thing. Obviously, it's like having a cloud over your head. Um, you really feel that cloud, that shadow. In both countries, I felt it, but especially I think in Paraguay. Um, they will pull you off the street. They will pull you off the street, even if you're an American. Americans were and probably are privileged and protected more than the local population would be, and you can get away with a little more because they're hesitant to do some things that are pretty outrageous. But in those days, there were a lot of hippies traveling, and they would pull hippies, long-haired people, off the bus in Brazil, and they had something called Operation Scissors. They would physically pull you off the bus and cut your hair for you because they associated long hair with radical ideas, with communism, and and would censor. You were censored what you could say, and for a writer, that
very
is
much so.
really. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Betty.
No, just agreeing.
Just agreeing. It's intimidating to anyone. And in Brazil, they had the same thing. We were working in the newsroom one afternoon at the Brazil Herald, and this is in Brazil, in Rio. And in came the government police with their berets. Were they blue berets or black berets? I've forgotten, Betty. Anyway,
black.
automatic weapons, and they shut the paper down. They took. There was a parallel publication there called Opinion, and ironically, they had written a back page article about the Amazon and that maybe the government's policies weren't so wise. And they shut the paper down. And there was about 15 minutes there. You can imagine a newsroom full with soldiers who came in with automatic weapons. And we knew, I think the editors, I was finance editor, and the other people who worked there knew that the government had a person in the newsroom. Actually, he was in accounting. We're pretty sure it was Aldo. I think it was anyway. Who was keeping his eyes and ears open for anything that would be contrary to government policy. So you live in that shadow, and people disappear. Rowena, I know you have a lot of international. You follow international news, and so in those days they had the desaparecidos. That's the Spanish word for, and also in Portuguese, the same word for disappeared. And the most famous instances of that were in Argentina, where they had the military junta. Lots of desaparecidos, people that they just would vanish, and you would never hear of them again. And it was because they spoke too loudly or they wrote too clearly about things. But Brazil also had its desaparecidos, people that, well, he was here yesterday and he was speaking out or writing, and those things, it's horrible, and it really makes you value freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, and those freedoms we have here really makes them precious to you, and makes you a strong advocate of them.
It makes you living under a dictatorship like that, where the police are not your friend. You keep away from the police because they can do anything to you with impunity. They had a conference. They had a big conference of travel agents in Rio while we were there in the 70s. And in addition to covering over the favelas, the slums, with big billboards so that the travel agents would not see the slums all around Rio, they also took the children who were begging, of which there were many, took them off the streets. Some of them just flat disappeared. And then some of them, they took them to an island, just dropped them off at an island that had nothing on it, that was a few miles off of Rio, and left them there. There's a kind of a hard-heartedness, especially from class to class, that fortunately we don't see as much here. And it's still there in Brazil. I can tell you a horror story a lot more recently. It probably was like 2005 or so, in Belém, in a city in the north of Brazil, at the mouth of the Amazon. Big city, very big city. A judge went into the supermarket a few minutes after it had closed and wanted to buy something, and the young man who was working there said, "I'm sorry, sir, it's closed. I can't sell you anything." And he said, "I want to buy this." And he said, "I'm sorry, sir, I can't." After a little bit of going back and forth, the judge pulled out a gun and shot the young man. And it's all on video. It's like, how can you even think like that? How can you even think like that?
My guess would be that he walked. I can't remember the details.
Yeah, sort of was the news, and then it wasn't the news.
Yeah, it was news, and it wasn't the news, and the justice system there. We want to be honest with this, and not sugarcoat things. The justice system there is extremely corrupt. Has been. We lived that first season, Rowena, of our lives in the 70s, and then we went back as adults. I went back when I was 50 for a second long season in Brazil, the second time for 10 years. And the justice system was no better that I could tell. Though they do have a democracy. Maybe
Yes.
it improved. There weren't so many desaparecidos and so many overt kind of acts, but certainly there are two different justice systems, I would say, or maybe more, 3 or 4 different justice systems, depending on where you are in the pecking order of the culture. And one might argue that we also have different justice systems in the United States.
Absolutely.
For different, so that we're not to say that we have certainly a perfect justice system here either.
I would like to say, though, that there have been many good changes governmentally, and Brazil is a wonderful country. We're telling all the bad stuff, but there was a dynamic where that generation that had that sort of class structure thing, like their lives are not worth as much as our lives. The dynamic was often they would send their kids to another country to study to become doctors, lawyers, whatever, often to the United States. And they would come back with different ideas about classes. So a lot of that generation then has become in power. And they're trying. Sometimes their efforts are not, I would not say, being on the ground there. We need to be careful when we're trying to help the poor, that we don't do it out of guilt. We don't do it out of, I'm better than you and I'm going to help you. We need to be allies. We need to learn in both directions. And that's, I guess, one of the things that I learned there, and have learned since, that we have a lot to grow by moving from culture to culture. We have a lot of room to be blessed by knowing people from other cultures. And
how did they view Americans? How do they view Americans now?
Now,
well, I might
ahead.
take that for.
Sure.
So there's a really interesting. I wanted just to distinguish between government and people for a minute.
Absolutely.
Some of the remarks we made have to do with government. And so you do carry the baggage of your government. There's no doubt. We carry, when you travel abroad as an American, you carry the baggage of being an American, the blessings and the baggage, I guess I would say. But I found both in Paraguay and in Brazil and Costa Rica, we've lived some other places in Latin America. People as individuals are willing to suspend, I would say, or put into the background your national baggage. For example, what happened in Vietnam or what happened in Iraq, or don't misunderstand me, the United States has done some really beautiful things. Actually, it took one of my German students to point this out to me. He says, well, how about the Marshall Plan? That's pretty beautiful after World War II. And so every country comes with those positives and negatives. But the Paraguayans and the Brazilians especially really extended grace. I think that's the right word. It's a spiritual term, really, as much as it is a secular one. Really grace as individuals. So yeah, I see that you're an American and your native language is English, and yeah, we've heard about that, and we've heard, and this and that. But we're willing to look you in the eyes and smile at you and say, you are an individual. You're a human being. You're an individual, and we can get along, and maybe we could become friends. That was my overriding experience with people,
Right.
And I think that goes back. I first went to Puerto Rico in 1971, and it was my experience with the Puerto Ricans. And there's frictions and baggage both ways there. And in Paraguay, the United States was complicit in keeping Stroessner, the dictator, in power, actually. We're complicit in some of those things, and they're not pretty. But I found individual Paraguayans and individual Brazilians full of grace and willing to, don't you think so, Betty?
Absolutely. One of the things that struck me on first living in Rio, first being in Brazil, was if you're trying to find something in the city, where's such and such a place, they won't tell you where it is. They will walk you there or drive you there or get you there by themselves. They're very proud of their hospitality. They're very very easy with who you are. You can be who you are, and they'll just laugh. They'll laugh with you at your mistakes with the language. They're very accepting. They definitely put everything else under relationship. They can teach us a lot about relationship.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah.
Did you have to align yourself with a local in order to get favor or to be part of the community?
Not really. Then you can talk to a stranger on the street and get invited to lunch. My whole relationship with Brazil started with an exchange student, and so I had family down there and so forth, but I didn't have to. In Rio, I had no family. I was just on my way through.
Right.
But they're very beautifully relational.
I can't really emphasize enough, though, how important it is to speak their language. And we went into these situations in Paraguay and in Brazil with some fluency, and it got better over time. And so, if you're traveling, people who travel abroad, I would say, hey, listen. Let's say it's your first trip abroad. I say, first of all, if don't fly to a country and go to the Hilton and sort of live this, get into a situation where it's a little America, and learn some of the language. Take the time, if it's only to learn, 25 or 30 or 50 words, because that's their heart language. And when you show up in a foreign country and expect them to speak English, it's already, you've sort of compromised your ability to get into the culture. So I would say, go to a pension, stay in a pension or someplace, and get out into the neighborhoods and get to know the people. Is that more dangerous? And is there more adventure in that? Yeah, it's not as safe and protected and sort of like an embryo as the Hilton would be, or the Marriott in Rio. But if you really want to get to know the people and understand the culture, get out into the neighborhoods, I would say, into the barrios, and yeah, to at least make an effort to say "Cómo está?" and
Please and thank you.
please and por favor, y muito obrigado, and a few things, and make an effort. And they're willing. I find people willing. I'm encouraged greatly by individual people, and not so much by governments. I don't know. Yeah. And,
Yeah.
So what was it like living there? How were you funded? Did you have to make all your money, or did you have money going in?
well, there was Brazil Part 1, and I was, paid. I lived very poor as a Peace Corps volunteer. You're paid a pittance. So there, in that case, the U.S. government was writing my checks. The Peace Corps was paying my way, on kind of a subsistence level. And then in Brazil, for a while, when we were there, we worked as journalists and graphic artist, photographer, and so that Brazil Part 1 chapter of our lives sort of closed, and we came back to the United States and had a family and spent a lot of years here. Going back the second time as missionaries, we went back to the Amazon as missionaries. That was funded by churches and individuals who had a heart for missions. And they were steady and wonderful, praying for us and supporting us on the mission field for over 10 years. So, and there was no particular agency. By the way, and just to kind of blow the horn for the church, there were very many denominations that supported us. It wasn't like one. So denominationally, the church came together and supported us in that way. And we weren't living a rich lifestyle. It wasn't richly supported, but it was certainly adequate.
Yeah,
we never went hungry. Yeah.
Yeah, it was also neat because a big chunk of what we did there was we were the guest house hosts, so that we would receive the teams that these churches usually it was other churches from the US, Canada, and then some from the south of Brazil too, more medical and dental teams from the south of Brazil, which is much more citified and educated and so forth. And they would come stay with us. We'd go out on river trips with them in these big steel-hulled boats, go to a village where people were very excited to have us come and help them to build a church, provide water filters, or of course medical, dental, sometimes all put together in one trip. So we get to see many different denominations work together. It was really a privilege, and to see the excitement and the faith and the out there we had many heroes from each of these villages that would take chances that the American church isn't used to taking. Put their lives on the line just to go, to paddle over to a community that was several miles away, perhaps have to deal with pulling off to the side because of storms and so forth, just to share God's love with them. So we learned a lot. So basically what we were doing as missionaries was backing up these people from the villages that were leaders in the villages and helping them help. So it was very, very exciting.
So the first experience in Brazil was very cosmopolitan, and in Rio. Brazil is a huge country. It's the size of the continental United States. And so the first experience, Rowena, was Rio, a big city, a very cosmopolitan experience. And that was back in the 70s, and and then the second much more recent experience in Brazil was very, very rural. And the Amazon typical village has no electricity, thatched houses, subsistence farming and just what you can catch from the river. No plumbing or running water. So it's very, as the United States has actually got that kind of diversity, right? You parachute into Los Angeles and you get one picture of the United States. You parachute into the hollows of Kentucky or West Virginia or southern Louisiana, and you get different pictures. And so our experiences there were very different. As you might imagine, the Amazon is a very, very different kind of jungle than the jungle that's in Rio, right? Two different kinds of jungle.
And we were very different people between the two.
And we were very different
as
people,
well.
much older and more
So-
seasoned for the second trip. Yeah, the second time. Yeah.
So how did it influence your writing?
Dramatically, I would say. Living poor was actually that first experience of living very poor. My house in Caazapá, Paraguay, was just a latrine and no running water and no electricity, so candlelight, and I was the only American in the village, so I understood what it felt like to be a minority. Oh, in this case, one American in the middle of a village of about 3,500 people. So that dramatically, those early days even actually some of those things ended up in the novel. The priest I met there who I played chess with, you know my work some, Rowena, so he ends up in this book, The Gravedigger's Dream, as Padre Chabrega, some of his characteristics. So even in those, I was still writing that whole time in Paraguay. And I'm kind of a compulsive note taker, so little things interest me a lot about people and the way things work. And those experiences ended up in my writing. The characters are mostly inspired by Brazilian characters in that book, with the exception of Padre Chabrega. But empathy, so this word empathy has been on my mind and my heart a lot of late, and both in the way that we live and the way that a writer writes. The greatest thing I think you can accomplish as a writer is to have your reader empathize in a way with the character, that the character would be three-dimensionally enough, alive enough to create empathy. And it might be different kinds of empathy, and traveling like that internationally and living abroad. The Amazon is a very poor place again, so we were exposed to it. I was exposed to it at great length there and in detail to understand what village life there is really like. And for example, our pantry here is full, and I'm not concerned about what we eat tonight or tomorrow or actually next week. But in the village, it is hand to mouth. And if the fishing doesn't go well in the river today, then you really don't have, and there's no refrigeration, remember, no electricity, so you can't store foods, frozen food, anything frozen. So it's very much hand to mouth, and it just changes a lot in terms of the way you live. Yeah.
Did anything that you saw there or experience in the Amazon, did it change your thinking about the kinds and causes of poverty, or did it illuminate ways to break the generational cycle of poverty?
That's and I want Betty to. I hope Betty will chime in, because she has a great gift for empathy, actually, and also for evangelism. But I think the bad actors are universal to me. They are universal. The bad actors in Brazil and in Paraguay and in Puerto Rico, and we've been other places. And Betty's been to Uganda on a mission trip, are the same. And they would start with dysfunctional family, for example. I think so much of civilization and culture is anchored in the family and the mother and father. And when that becomes dysfunctional, all kinds of other dysfunctions and pathologies come out of that. Our old enemies that have to do with addictions, with alcoholism and drugs and gambling and tobacco, all of the addictions that impoverish us. So if you say, wow, that village in the Amazon, in my book, I named it Jacaré, which means alligator in, actually it's Tupi Guarani. It's a Guarani word. It's not Portuguese, but so in Caazapá, in my fictional village, which is actually a real place, but the bad actors there are the same as they are here I live in South Carolina, in Somerville. Yeah, the setting is different. We have a great deal more wealth and, some other, but really the things that cause poverty, there's poverty, physical poverty, and also spiritual poverty, right?
Right.
You can be poor in different ways. You can be very rich and very, very poor in spirit, so to speak. But so I think those are universally bad actors. I don't know, Betty, would you?
Well, I guess I have two thoughts. The more recent one, of course, in the Amazon would be the need we have to hope, the need we have to believe that life can be different and there's a reason to try. It's great to have someone give you a hand up, but just not to just say, well, this is my lot. We had Don had a friend who was 35 years old, couldn't read or write, and we offered to teach him to read and write. And he said, no, this is just the way I am. It's the way it's going to be. And he was being taken advantage of left and right by his boss. It was just awful. And he just couldn't be convinced that it could be changed. Again, maybe the history of the class system there. But as far as what I learned, I think the biggest shock for me was the story of the Tropical Hotel near where we lived in the Amazon. We lived in a city of 200,000 people. It was a small city, but the nearest cities that size or larger were over 600 miles away. In between were thousands, tens of thousands of little villages. At any rate, here we are in the middle of nowhere, and there's this gorgeous luxury hotel. And I look at it and I go, who's going to come here? Why would anyone want to come here in the middle of nowhere? And someone explained to me that they had actually owned a whole huge area of land, and they had planned to put in zoos and golf courses and shops and so forth, and make it a place actually where a lot of people could get employed. They could sell their crafts. They could clean rooms. They could, any number of opportunities for many different gifts. But there's a standing sort of issue for landowners is people squat on land. And if they are squatting on your land, it's very hard to get them off. So that whole area became neighborhoods, very poor neighborhoods. And it became kind of it went downhill, went into drugs and so forth. So it was an eye-opener for me, because my immediate reaction was, oh, this wealthy, resort hotel, ignoring these poor people that are all around it. Well, if there had been some kind of an acceptance of the opportunities that would have been available for them, using the resources that wealthy hotel had for their own advantage, then there might not have been so poor. So one of the things that our mission was working with was setting up vocational training, literacy, all sorts of things like that, and medical clinics, dental free clinics, that sort of thing. But so much more would have been possible if that could have been an actual resort that somebody would want to come to. So then the Tropical Hotel went way downhill. Nobody was coming there.
It had rats in it.
It had rats.
Time we stayed there.
Luxury hotel with rats.
So yeah, so it decayed. The
Yeah,
neighborhood decayed.
yeah.
So squattering, in that case, you think, well. On the other hand, Betty and I were talking about this actually yesterday, and I said, well, they're squatting because they need a place to live, and they're
Right.
breaking the law, and they're actually grabbing someone else's land, and real estate laws aren't respected in Brazil, and so if you don't have the rule of law, then though you might justify it on a social level, saying, well, they need a place to live. Yeah. On the other hand, if you don't have the rule of law, then you get other kinds of decay, right? That actually come around to bite you, regardless of your socioeconomic status. And so, very difficult problems there. I think one of the things in the book, Rowena, is kind of one of the key lines is in the early part of the book, The Gravedigger's Dream. There's a meeting, or kind of a rough meeting, between a local, a Brazilian, and this Irish man. And he says the Brazilian's kind of, he's a little bit, actually he's a little bit drunk, and he says, "Oh, you came here to, snapshot the locals, or take pictures of us, or you think you're going to solve our problems? You think you're going to solve our poverty?" And he comes back and he said, "That's not the real illness. The real illness is hopelessness." And I think that that's really true. Once a man or woman becomes hopeless, then, as Betty said, you say, well, I'd be glad, we do actually teach English. We teach ESL, and to willing students, but someone says, no, this is the way it's always been. The government's corrupt. My family is uneducated. My family is poor. Once you're hopeless, then, something is really broken inside of you that's very difficult to fix. Very difficult to fix. And
this is where we did see some huge changes in people's lives as we brought God's love out to villages, and people did receive the message, the gospel message. We saw people go from literally the town drunk who's always lying in the middle of the dirt road to pastor of a healthy, thriving church, much beloved. So there's hope there. If you can just ignite that hope, it makes a huge difference in people's lives. And that changes the whole, one person changed in a village changes the whole village. There's people see what can happen and they get excited. It's contagious. So.
Betty, you've been to other places. You've been to Uganda and you did village work there. Tell us about that.
Well, I can't claim to be anything close to an expert on Uganda. I was there for, I'm not even sure if it was a full 2 weeks, but we were in a very, very poor village, one of the poorest in Uganda, where some friends who had a very grassroots charity had started a sponsorship program. At that point, I think they had 150 kids sponsored for paying their school fees, because public school is not free there, and clothing and food on Saturdays, and fun stuff on Saturdays to do. So there was hope coming in, and consistent relationship. It's so much relationship. It's so much about that. That's why we went. That's why I went, was because we had a couple of girls, still have a couple of girls that were sponsoring there. And we met a guy from Uganda who said, no, he's from Kenya, who said, if there's any way you can visit them, go there. And it was so true, because they become humans, not just, and we become humans to them. And I don't know, there's something beautiful in that. But just about that village, why was the village so poor? Why was it one of the poorest in Uganda? I would say, from a spiritual point of view, they were very, very oppressed. There was no hope. Why was there no hope? there was huge corruption. And one of the folks we were working with told, I don't know if you want to hear a gruesome story, but there's a lot of witchcraft stuff there. Actually, Don's book talks about, addresses this issue. People, a lot of families would have a goat tied out in front of their house, and that was not just for milk, that was for sacrifices. And he told us of these, I'm not sure what the name would be for them there, but people who would do spells for you, and they would say, for that spell, I need a two-legged goat. So you need to bring me a two-legged goat. A two-legged goat was a human being. So little girls would have their ears pierced and a piece of wood stuck through their ears so they wouldn't be perfect. Because if they were perfect, they were liable to get kidnapped for sacrifice.
So that still goes
Killing.
on. Yeah, that still goes on in our world, I mean, those kinds of things. And they still go on in Brazil, actually. And yeah, I didn't go to Uganda, but when I saw the pictures, Betty took a lot of pictures. It's actually poor. It's actually the poorest place I've ever seen. And that's saying quite a bit, because we've been into the favelas and the slums of Rio and some other places. And in the Amazon, it's poor. Paraguay. And Uganda is, I would say those same bad actors I spoke of earlier are also at work there.
Yeah.
Families blown apart. The men aren't at home. There would be alcohol. I know this without even having visited, but correct me if I'm wrong, Betty. It's going to be the same bad actors in Uganda.
Right. Absentee dads. Absentee dads. So the sons are looking for dads in the street, and the daughters are looking for dads with any guy who'll say anything nice to them.
Yeah. I was listening to a Denzel Washington. He's really made some neat. He sometimes does graduations for colleges. I really admire him as an actor, but also as an individual. And he said, I'm telling you this, I'm telling you this, if the boy doesn't find his father at home, he'll go find his father on the street. Right. And he was making some strong points about that. And it's the same, that dysfunction is it's going to cause real problems wherever on earth you are. I think it's a key source of poverty. And
if I can just say, there's a huge difference too between, and I think it's more so in Latin countries, huge difference between rural poor and city poor. The people along the Amazon, depending on what river, I mean, there are 1,000 rivers, literally.
1,100. I looked it up. Well,
feed into the Amazon.
That's the number of tributaries. Yeah.
The tributaries. Yeah. Okay. But depending on what river you were on, some of them had very good fishing and some of them not so much. If you had the ability to fish, you could at least, you could rely on that. If you didn't, then if you're in the city, what are you going to do if you can't get a job? If you can't read or write, you're just going to be taken advantage of. Right. One of the sadder things that happened, we could argue both sides about the use of the Amazon ecologically. The people around that area need work, and the oftentimes farms that would raise areas of trees and so forth to grow rice or soybeans would then be hiring people. There'd be people that would be there we could become mechanics to help with their equipment and so forth and so on. Flip side of that, how did they get that land? Well, there were people living there lots of times beforehand, and they would go in quietly, individually, to each individual home and say, listen, I'll give you, they'd flash a big wad of cash that people had never seen that much cash before. you give me your land, you can take this money into the city, and and they would be seduced. Many people were seduced by that, and they take that money into the city and find it's gone in a year, and they don't have any city skills. They know how to hunt, and they know how to raise stuff, and they're experts at stuff they can't do anymore. So there's another huge cause of city poverty. It's somehow sadder than because you can't do anything. You can't use your gifts. You can't be really good at anything,
You had mentioned in the past that you've taken a class called Poverty 101.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, for me, it was so I'm an older guy, and I experienced a lot, like I was saying, in Paraguay, of living poor and mingled with a lot of different cultures. But it really was an eye opener for me. I would say, a real game changer even. I'm going to actually give you the woman's name who taught it. It's only a 4-hour course. I'm saying, how could a 4-hour course so impact me? I mentioned earlier I'm a compulsive note taker. I took more notes in that 4 hours than I can. I can't think of a time when we're more concentrated learning. Her name is Mindy Johnson. Jameson. She taught that particular course called Poverty 101, but the source of that was actually, I need to mention another woman's name. It's Ruby Payne, right, Betty?
Yeah.
And she wrote a book called Certified Bridges Out of Poverty.
No, Bridges Out of Poverty. Bridges Out of Poverty is the name for
I don't know where I got the certified. Bridges Out of Poverty.
Yeah, right.
I guess it was a certified teaching or something.
Right, she's a certified teacher.
So, Betty, we mentioned earlier that Betty works as an interpreter, right? She translates Portuguese to English and English to Portuguese. And so this woman who spoke and brought this teaching is a cultural interpreter, a cultural interpreter, a cultural guide, because we need to understand, in this case, middle class Americans or upper middle class, whatever, wealthy Americans cannot understand. They don't have the experience or the education to understand what poverty really is. This woman lived in a very, very poor part of Des Moines, Iowa, and was a missionary slash. She lived there 10 years. Neighborhood that was mostly a black or brown neighborhood, Latino and black neighborhood, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and she brought the teachings of what that learning curve looked like to be in that culture, because the United States is full of subcultures, hundreds of subcultures. And in this case, she was trying to teach us and very, very beautiful and effective teaching of what it's like to live poor, how that changes things, right? Yep. In 100 different ways. And
her first question for us, if I can jump in here, was kind of revealing. She said, define poverty. How do you define poverty? And however you define poverty, that's the direction you're going to go when you try to work to help someone out of poverty. Now, is it education? Is it money? Is it relationship? What is it? She gave an example just to give us, put things in perspective for us. She said, what happens if you're speeding and a cop pulls you over? She said, well, what happens to me, I get real nervous, I cry, whatever, I'm like, oh no, my insurance is going to go up and all that. Well, if you're really on the line in poverty, okay, the cop pulls you over. Oh, well, your driver's license is expired because you couldn't pay to get a new driver's license, and your registration for your car, that was out 3 months ago. So your car gets impounded. So you then can't get to work. So then you lose your job. Well, your rent is also in arrears. So then you lose your home. Well, then then you're out in the street with your kids. The kids can't live out in the street, so the government comes and takes your kids away. This can all happen in 24 hours. She called it the 24-hour perspective.
So
We
it's like,
think,
yeah, it's like life without any margin.
yeah,
Like you haven't got any margin for anything to go wrong. A little thing like, well, relatively little thing like a speeding ticket turns out to be catastrophic.
yeah. We think in terms of well, plan ahead and think of what your goals are and so forth. And those are good things, but it's a whole different, other things need to be addressed. She also gave the example of they're trying to help, and they had this whole every Saturday they'd make this big breakfast, and they were trying to get the kids from the gangs and so forth in to sort of join them, but they'd get a few women and that was it. Well, one time this older guy comes in and says, and I guess she wasn't able to be there, her husband made the meal and it came out terrible, and the guy said, "This is awful." And her husband was kind of exhausted and fed up by that time. He said, "Well, then you make it next time." He says, "All right, I'm going to come in next Saturday, but this is what you need to buy for me to make the meal for all these people." Well, sure enough,
breakfast, the weekly Saturday breakfast, right?
Right.
Yeah.
He comes in the next Saturday with the gang members, with the entire half the community, and fixes a gourmet breakfast because he happened to be an excellent cook. So we don't need to come in as the saviors. We come in as allies, and a lot more can be done. We can help to teach each other what our languages are. Different things are valued. And if you're going to go try and get a loan, you're going to talk to somebody at the bank. You need to speak middle class. You can't speak poverty class, okay? They won't give you the loan. You need to convince them. You need to sort of do a rational numbers and so forth and so on reason why you're a good bet for them.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I really need this money. You need to give me this money.
Right. On the story about the cook, it really touched me because we think, well, they were cooking breakfast in a place called La Esquina, the corner. It's kind of a combination of a mission, and it had a lot of different aspects to it. She had all these light. The light went off in her mind over a period of 10 years. Like he has all these people have gifts. The fact that they're poor does not mean they're not gifted and have a lot to offer. And so their thinking is not helping. And so what this gentleman was, he was a black man, was an older man, was respected in the barrio, Des Moines. It wouldn't be called a barrio probably, but in the neighborhood. And he was out on the street, and so word got out. Charles, I can't remember his real name, is going to be cooking Saturday morning, And so that whole idea of like, here's a guy that's been hanging around or been around in the neighborhood for, years. And we never thought to recognize that he has gifts to bring, which is what really makes him valuable, right? It's what gives him hope and gives him meaning. Hey, I cooked breakfast for like 60, the gang members came in, even not just the women, and the black brothers came in, and the Latin brothers came in, and just a moment where the light went off in her head and she realized, wow, we need to be. There was another example, just don't want to go on too long about this. She got pregnant and was having kind of a troubled pregnancy, and one of the ladies wanted to give her a shower. Help me out with my details on this story if I got this right, Betty. But and her first thought was, she is really poor. She shouldn't be spending this money to give me a shower. And then that earlier thought with the cook, oh yeah, this is her way of flowering, of contributing, and so she threw this party, this baby shower. It's pretty elaborate, huh, Betty? as she
Yeah,
told me.
all kinds of
It had all.
decorations,
It was
all
Latin. It had a Latin
yeah,
theme because she happened to be, Latin, and so like it was decorated. And
just a
yes,
lot of
was she
love.
poor? Yes. Was
Yeah.
this a special occasion? She wanted to honor her pregnant sister, right? And it was beautiful. And it was her chance to give, to deprive someone of a chance to give or to show off their talent, is like to really deprive them of something that's really quintessentially human, right? I mean, let them flower. Don't,
Mhm.
yeah, you want to empathize and yeah, you want to help, but don't deprive them of that. That's what I just was taking notes and notes and notes on
Yeah.
that because it has so much to do with character and how we interact. Yeah.
Right. Right. And how we look at she gave another example of how we communicate. Um, I'm not going to be able to give you the statistics, but that the children that are in this one study, I guess that were in poverty, their vocabulary was much, much smaller than the wealthier kids. And the example was given when she had a mom on a bus with a child that's acting out. Okay, child standing up in their seat or whatever. The wealthier woman would say, now you need to sit down because we could have an accident, and that's part of the rules of being on this bus. Now sit down, please. I
And you
said
need to
sit
be,
down.
maybe you need to be respectful of others
Be
around you and
respectful of
this
others.
kind of whole spiel,
Right. Okay, depending on the child, I don't know how that would go, but at least they've heard a whole bunch of words there. Whereas I'm sure this is not across the board, but the woman who's grown up with this same dynamic of communication might look at her child who's standing in the seat and just say, sit down now. And the child sits down because they better. So we've got 3 words there as opposed to whole concepts. There's no teaching about why or other people or safety. There's a lot of areas that have not been covered there. Just sit down, So these are, but those
yeah.
are those. The Poverty 101 went into, it's geared to teach people to become allies and to get involved relationally. So learning about the needs and the way that we can help each other was very close to the center focus there. So there's a lot in there that you can't do from far away. You can't do from an office. It's one-on-one, and it's not just a philosophy, it's relationship.
So you spent 4 decades working with different types of people, 10 of which you spent in the Amazon.
Yeah, I don't know if it's 10 in the Amazon, and grand total of a couple years around at other places. But
well, there was 5. I had 5. I had 2 in the Paraguay and 2 in Brazil, and then we had some other short-term stays in Costa Rica and in Central America. So I did a tally. It was about 15 years for me, or 16, once you add up shorter stays. We enjoy traveling internationally a lot. The world's a very interesting place. But I think the first South America Part 1 for me was about 5 years, and then this more recent stay was 10. So, but beautiful experience. Really, I'm encouraged on some levels by how good people are individually.
Yeah.
how willing they are to, like I said before, accept you eye to eye or toe to toe, and as a human being, and give you a chance. That's so important in our society. I think we're so divided, and we make all these assumptions about instantaneous judgments and assumptions about people. That this word I heard. I'm very interested in words, as you know. Assumicide, which is a really interesting word. To assume the worst about my brother or sister, or to assume they have they're acting in bad faith or with bad motives. This is regardless of color or class. Let's come to them with an open heart and with a willingness to give them, instead of assuming the worst of them, assume the best, and until they prove otherwise, I guess, give them the same grace that we were given so often, huh, Betty?
Yeah, and there's also an assumicide where, that person must be furious at me because I forgot to blank, blank, blank. The person might not even remember that was an issue. So
right.
Communication and relationship is key to a lot of health.
Yeah.
Have you been able to exist and survive and thrive as an author? Does the most of your income come from being an author?
It doesn't. I'm actually I'm in a position to retire, but haven't retired at all. So I'm getting Social Security and have some other wealth, accumulated through the years. I've worked my whole life as a journalist, really. My main income, beginning with my newspaper work in Brazil, and then into magazine work. As a senior editor with magazines, Solar Age, and then as a freelance writer. Did a lot of magazine writing for some national publications, and so really as a working writer, a journalist, and nonfiction work. I have 3 books that are nonfiction that came out of those. Actually, I wrote a lot about business, so my interest overlaps in that area with economics and technology, especially energy technology. So that's really been how I earned my living. Actually, The Gravedigger's Dream is my first novel. It's, as you know, it's a 2-part novel. The second part forthcoming in October, called The Third Promise. And I, to be realistic, one does not grow rich unless you're, unless you're Ernest Hemingway or John Grisham or somebody who makes it into that top elite tier of writers, novelist. You cannot expect to grow rich writing novels. And having said that, it is such a joyous endeavor. It's so much fun. I love writing to start with, and to write novels is great. And I have people come up to me, and they like to talk about writing. Many people aspire to be writers, and I will say to them, listen, it's not a question of whether or not you're published so much. Writing is such a beautiful, what a gift from God, I would say. First of all, the gift of communications, to be able to speak. We have gifts that no other animal, no other species has, the ability to speak and communicate and to write. I mean, it's a miracle practically to me. So I sort of encourage everybody to write, journal, write letters, write, because it's such a great mental discipline, and to put down your thoughts on paper, your feelings on paper, and or not on paper so much anymore, but on a screen, into bits and bytes. But so writing is a very wonderful trade, by the way. I encourage people to get. It's a very, very portable trade. It's very portable geographically. You can work in Brazil if you have an ability with the language. You can really work anywhere, and you can jump fields. Basically, any field needs someone who can write clear, concise, well-written English, right? Or attorneys need it. Athletes need it. Any field needs it. Business, technology.
What would you say is the hardest part of writing?
Well, it requires discipline, especially. So when I used to work for newspapers and magazines, that discipline comes sort of from the structure, right? I've had a copy editor. I'm old enough to have worked on typewriters. So I've actually had copy editors come up to my desk and pull its deadline. Deadlines really count, right? And come up and pull the paper out of my typewriter, and that's it. They say that newspapers are history's first draft. And so that those deadlines are imposed upon you, and in magazines as well. It's more of a monthly deadline. You know, today's the day. The story has to be ready, and it goes on to production and layout and so on. But when you're writing fiction, when you're writing by yourself, those deadlines, that discipline has to be self-imposed or self. I started to say self-inflicted, but that discipline has to be. I still get up every morning early. I like to write early and write every morning, and because I love it, so that helps, right? And yeah.
What advice would you give young people who aspire to be a writer?
Well, like I said before, I think you can, if you'll polish your trade and build your vocabulary and put the tools in place. There is going to be demand for writers. There are going to be demand for. I know some of the companies here locally, Mercedes and Bosch and Boeing, and these people need people who can write. Now, you may be doing technical manuals, or you may be writing briefs for a lawyer. Maybe you're writing grant requests for grants, but you can make a living as a writer. It's a very portable trade. You can move fields, you can move geographically. My advice would be, as within other professions, would be to, work at your trade, build your vocabulary, work at your writing, and you become better over time, and have self-discipline. That's valuable in any trade, right? Any profession. For writing novels, I think your passion, I was thinking about this as far as, so like some of the movies we see are very mediocre. Some of them are really poor. When I'm in the mood for a movie, I really have trouble, even though we have 12 streaming channels, finding something that's good. And so a lot of poor stuff is written, very poor movies, poor screenplays, I think, in my view. So where does the great stuff come from? To me, it comes from passion. And these two books, this two-part novel was written out of certain passions from my travels and my experiences. And I was thinking, and I'll try not to be long-winded here, but I was thinking about Ernest Hemingway, about this, because I'm teaching writing, and I wanted to teach this to young writers. So regardless of what you think of Hemingway and his personal life and character, which weren't perfect, let's say that, he wrote out of his passions and his direct experience. The Old Man and the Sea, for example, he was an avid deep sea fisherman. He knew what it was like to bring in a 200 or 300 or 400 pound marlin, the big fish out off the coast of Cuba, and he knew what it was like, because he lived it direct, to hook a big fish and have the sharks take it apart on the way in, so that when you got the fish finally up to the side of the boat, there was nothing but just the remains the sharks had left. He knew what that was like firsthand. All of the sensory experiences of how tired your arm got, fighting with that fish, and what it was like to see the sharks hit your prize. And that, you read this short little beautiful book. I think that maybe won him I'm not sure where he won his prizes, but not a long book, a beautiful book that really reflects Hemingway's passion and his direct experience. So I think that is what distinguishes, in screenplays and novels, ordinary work or not so good work from really great work, is your passion and your heart is in it and your experiences in it. I think, to me, that's what I teach anyway. So yeah.
So tell us the premise of The Gravedigger's Dream.
Well, it harkens back to some of the things I said earlier. It came out of characters you borrow from people and experiences to put your characters together. That disclaimer in the front of books, you always read in fiction, none of the characters in this book bears any resemblance to anyone living or dead. Is the lawyers demand that? But that's not quite true, is it? We really borrow character traits, physical characteristics from people, and we find them interesting or funny or dreadful. Maybe they're villainous. And so these books came out of people I really met. I mentioned Padre Chabrega, in a sense styled after a pastor, not a pastor, but a Catholic father that I knew and played chess with. The characters run the story then. You have an idea, but if the story is really good, the characters will kind of take over and do surprising things. I really like that when that happens. Go, wow, I didn't really expect that till this morning, that she would do that or he would do that. And so maybe the plot actually is evolving in a dynamic kind of way if characters are well drawn. So that's kind of how that, and out of village life, some of the universal things I mentioned earlier, Rowena, realizing that the soul of a human being, the character of a human being who lives in a poor river village or in Cazapá in Paraguay, or a poor river village in the Amazon, is not quintessentially or fundamentally any different than my next door neighbor here. Created an image of God with certain eternal things, and some beautiful gifts that may or may not be being realized. And the challenge of children particularly touches my heart, because there's a scene in the book where his teacher, he's learning English, learning how to write early on in the book, says to him, we are poorly loved here in Brazil. He's talking about the dictator now. We're poorly loved here. We're like plants that don't receive water or sunlight. And he's talking about the kids now wither on the vine or never fruit. And so that element is in the book, and hope are very strongly woven into the book because they're close to my heart. Especially with kids, my kids are Betty and I both work with kids a lot here in Somerville, and to see how beautiful they are and full of potential and innocent yet, or at least relatively innocent. We work with, how are the kids, Betty? They're like 10, right? Most of the kids we're working with right
10
now.
or 11.
Yeah. So beautiful, so full of promise. And so that was a little bit of a long-winded answer, Rowena, but those threads, because you see children wilting on the vine in the river villages in Brazil, that they're never going to realize it. Let's be honest. Let's be brutally honest. They are never going to realize the gifts. And actually, that same scene in the book, he says, who knows but what there's an Einstein or a Mozart or he uses a Brazilian author that's out there, and they are never going to flower. But that could also say that within my neighborhood here, the same truth applies, right? So our heart is, yeah.
But it's a more diametrically opposed situation as far as well, what you address in The Gravedigger's Dream with the need for a school.
The need for a school was
there are schools here. Some of them are great and some of them are not so great. But back in the 70s, which is the period of that book, there was really nothing. And we're talking about 2.3 million square miles is the area of the Amazon basin. So try and get schools to everybody there in these little villages. Now, I will say, since then, it's really, they've made some huge changes. You do find schools, at least through the 4th grade in most places. So, but anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt
No, that's not an interruption. That's actually very true. So that idea of dying on the vine has to do with schools and a child's chance to grow in their gift, in their gifting. And it is tragic, isn't it? Let's be honest. In the United States, how poor our schools are. Let's not, let's not get uppity at all about this. There were some horrible statistics about how the schools are failing in the United States. In Baltimore, I don't know, it was a huge percentage of kids who don't know how to read who are graduating and are functionally illiterate. And so, those are things that touch your heart. And they are also, again, back to your, I know your heart, Rowena, has to do with poverty and why we are poor and what we can do. And I've been doing some work on the side to try to understand why the schools are failing and in the United States. And it's a complex issue, a lot more complex than I thought when I first started to look into it. But yeah.
What I noticed about you, Don, is your amazing author's voice. You have a literary style to your writing that is difficult to find nowadays. It's one of those things that we aspire as editors and publishers to find. So I was very blessed to come upon your book and your writing. Why do you think people like your book so much? You've had tremendous reviews on it.
Well, first of all, that's humbling. I thank you for those kind words. Maybe it is because there are some universal threads to it. They could follow that. This man who is very different in some ways, my protagonist, is quite flawed, as you know. He has a lot of character weaknesses. His village is certainly got all kinds of struggles and problems that are universal. They're common to the world. Is yet looking for a way up. He hasn't given up hope. Actually, in his case, it hasn't been crushed. And you can have your hope crushed, and he's still looking for. In this case, he has a son. Not to spoil too much of the story, who is gifted. He's really ready to bloom. He could bloom. He shows it early, and he's, despite his character weaknesses, character, and the problems with his community, he wants to see a way forward, carve a way forward for that boy. And is that not the truth in Uganda, or the truth in Baltimore? It is, isn't it? That our hope as parents, or even if you're not a parent, even if you're just, to look at kids and say, yeah, that's the future, that's the seed corn, and to want it to, we still have that hope. We want it to go well with them, right? And yeah, so I think maybe the reason people have been encouraging about the book is hopefully the characters. So difficult to make a character come alive on paper, and to work with it. So I really worked hard at trying to make the characters come alive and be real. And
I can say this, that this was a book that Don has been working on for about 10 years. So he takes the time to express a feeling, put you into the middle of a dialogue, and get you so that you are just wound up in this person or in this event or in this concern. So
another thing I've been thinking is you really need to respect your readers and give them they're to be really respected. First of all, they're reading a book, and a fair amount of the population has sort of lapsed into just watching pictures, watching videos and pictures, and don't really read. Though my son said some encouraging things to me. He says, I think books are coming back, and there's more people. I've had some people recently say, in fact, this morning, right, Betty? We had some kids say, oh, I love books. And we teach church, we teach the 4th and 5th graders at our church. And they were talking, some of the kids were saying, we didn't prompt them either. They were saying, I love to read. And so, but anyway, back to my point, to respect your readers. In my case, for example, I put some Portuguese mm, to season the book and to put it into Brazil where it's set. Actually, there's some Portuguese in the book, and early, one of the agents that looked at the book early on said, "Oh, you can't do that. You know that Americans won't go there with you. You know, if they start to see some Portuguese sprinkled, it's not heavily. You can certainly understand the whole story without understanding the Portuguese. It's put there like seasoning, the way you would put paprika, you know, or cayenne in a dish." Um, he said to me, you can't expect your readers to go there with you. And well, I can't. I do. I want my. I think I want to take my readers someplace where we grow and together, and I can show them some things about Brazil and about the Amazon and about the Brazilian characters that they have not experienced before, and they're willing to give it a try. And you know, I'd like to respect them and treat them as, in that way. Not go ahead and use vocabulary, for example. I've heard other writers or agents say, look, you need to dumb down the language. Americans don't have the vocabulary anymore to use that word. What was the word? Mediocre. What was it at the newspaper in Texas, Betty? Remember Ed Driscoll? He came into the newsroom and said, you can't use that. No, it wasn't. It was nostalgia.
Nostalgia.
It was a nostalgia. So we used the word nostalgia. I'm not making this up. The editors in this newspaper in Texas where I was working, we used the word nostalgia. And he said, you can't use that word because your audience doesn't know what it means. And so am I going to say, okay, well, I'm going to dumb down the language because I assume my readers are dumb or they don't want to grow and learn that word. I don't think so. You know, I want to use the words that are appropriate, not throw in big words just to throw them in, but use just the right word. And if it stretches them, then I respect them, you know, and they'll look it up. Maybe they'll look it up.
Yeah, well, but when you're reading along, you learn new words without even realizing you're learning them because of the context. You know, in anything.
Yeah, so I learn new words all the time. I'm still growing my vocabulary. So hey. Anyway.
So with that, what are the characteristics and tools would a writer need these days? I mean, it seems like our vocabulary is shrinking.
That's true, and it may be. It's so sad, isn't it? Because language is, I would say, a gift from God. It's one of the things that makes human beings really special, right? To be able to communicate our feelings and our thoughts and our ambitions. And if we dumb down the language, what does that say about our culture? And so I don't know. It has to it goes back to the schools, doesn't it? You know, teach your children well and teach them at home. And you know, we've got to address this thing of our failing schools, and it doesn't necessarily mean more money for the schools. I know that's the quick and dirty answer, but it's not. I've looked into it deep enough to know it's not. There's problems embedded in the culture and in the dysfunctional family and in the neighborhood. But gosh, Rowena, that's real disintegration to me of a civilization or of a culture. That your language is being dumbed down, where you can't express sophisticated ideas or deep feelings or empathetic thoughts that have to do with empathy and soul and spiritual thoughts. You know, we're spirit creatures, I believe. And my gosh, to be given language and then to let it be dumbed down is such a loss.
A lot of it is just making learning fun. It's hard to do that if you're in a big classroom with a lot of kids with all different interests and all different levels of interest in each thing. We homeschooled our kids, and it made a huge difference because they could flourish in their own giftings. Now, I know that's not an option for everybody, but I think there's some changes being made that might make that more possible for more people.
I have a question now. I've been listening, and God, this show is awesome. And you're in from by the way. Now, if I remember correctly, I've stayed in Uganda as well, and they still have the children being taken to different parts of the land for ritualistic sacrifices, and it has not changed. Um, and I was there back in 87,
Mm.
92, and when I was in the military, went to um, me and some friends. We took leave and we did 2 weeks in traveling around Africa. Also, I used to live actually in Brazil
Really?
back in
Really?
Woo!
'86. So I do know what you're talking about the Amazon. And also, do they? I think they still have the fish mafia there. Uh, those guys are, yeah, they want to control the fish market that's there in Brazil, and a lot of it's headquartered, as they say, out in the Amazon. But they always say it's Rio de Janeiro. No, it's not Rio. It's these little small communities outside of Rio that's controlling the whole Amazon. Um, a question I have for you is, when you convert from the Portuguese or the Spanish language to English, you lose a lot of the meaning, the emotional attachments to the words. Um, a lot of the translations, they are faulty because they do not hold the emotional, how can I say, vocabulary that's within the language.
Hmm.
Our language is basically based off of Latin and Greek, so very unemotional, very to the point blank, blunt languages. Do you find that by integrating a little bit of more of the Latin culture into our language system would find its way um, to giving us more of a possible empathetic language for the world? I mean, a current um, Hispanic language is predominantly the largest language in the world next to that of China, not English. More people are learning that language. Like back in the old days when I was going to high school, they gave us option of Japanese, Chinese, Spanish, and French, and some of us took Russian or Germany. They don't give those languages to us anymore. Russian, they don't use articles. I do know that because I lived in Russia back in '87 to '88. I mean, my question should be: do you think there's going to be a way that the American English language actually adds a little bit more meaning or cohesion of feelings into its linguistic background?
I think it's happening with the internet and availability of universal availability of the same uh, uh, media. It's happening already. We are not, as I saw I saw an old Milton Berle show that was priding itself on how international it was. And it must have been from the 50s or something like that. It was comical and insulting and really, is this what you know? I mean, they were mixing up like India and Africa. It's like, are you there? Anybody
Yeah,
home? You're doing this on national television.
and people
Um,
actually believe that stuff too. I mean, it's like, Americans are very short-sighted when it comes to cultures around the world. They, like you said, they mixed India with African culture, which Africa is a continent, but different parts of Africa, like Nigeria. They actually integrate, um, for example, when people are talking about Constantinople, they talk about the Emperor Constantine. They forget that was Turkish, and they forget that it was the influencer behind the revolution known as Christianity. They forget about the ideologies that came from those areas of the world and how they influenced the world we have today.
Mhm.
So, I mean, there's so much influence in the language. And by the way, I have to say it, that book. I gotta go. That book. I I I do remember the book, and actually, one of my hosts on the network actually has read your book. Thank you, Q, Rocky Dadon. He's read the book, and he's actually like, yeah, that's a good book, man. Uh, uh, and I'm like, okay, well, Rocky reads books now. That's very good. But I mean, that's the way this network is. We have a lot of people that read a lot of different things, and we are a smorgasbord of a knowledge base. I mean, a smorgasbord. I mean, wow. But I got a question from you, for you, from Miles Moonbases also. Miles asked, while you were in Brazil, did you see any unidentified objects while you were looking up at the night or day sky?
We did. I did not. We did not. But I know that it's a hot. The Brazilians are very interested in that. Actually, one of the characters in the book is of that, of that community that is looking into the night sky and hoping to spot aliens or find them at work on the ground. How about you, Betty? Did you ever?
No, what I
Yeah.
remember from the sky was just the beauty of traveling on the top of the boat, just lying down on the top of the boat, looking up at the night sky and just seeing the Milky Way like you never saw it
Because there's no
before.
electric lights, no
No
cities,
lights,
no,
no
light. They call it
lights.
light pollution, right?
Oh
No
my
light pollution.
goodness.
So you
Beautiful,
see
beautiful
this.
glowing.
I want
But
to. I
that's
want
not
to
what
go
you
back
asked.
to what he said about language, though, for just a minute. That was a really interesting question because there are words. Your native language is your heart language, right? And Betty is a professional interpreter. Actually, she's certified. She does court interpretations and all kinds of translations. And to get a hold of those words, like the word saudade comes to mind in Portuguese, right, Betsy?
Right.
And so words have come out of your soul in a way. They do go through, it's mental for sure. Because, you speak it, saudade. But that word actually may not have any quite equivalent, right? They said there's other words.
Right. It's
It
a
has to
deep
do with
longing.
deep
Yeah.
longing or homesickness that is embedded in your heart when you're away from your home.
Or when you really miss someone. It doesn't
But
have to
what
be
you
at home.
said about language is like you used the word smorgasbord. I think we stole that from the Swedes,
Yes, we
right?
did.
And
Yeah.
I teach my students. I say, English, like we have a lot of French in our language, a lot, chandelier, reservoir, garage, all those. And so like we steal. Okay, I mean that word steal is kind of rough, but um,
Yeah, we steal.
uh, we do.
Just
But
be
no,
honest, we steal it.
instead of steal, let's say assimilate. There's a nice verb, right? Assimilate words. And I think to your point, that really enriches the language. And if we can, and it really helps us to communicate, right?
It
Correct.
makes it harder to learn the language though, trying to explain to someone how to pronounce chandelier and why is it not ch.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so that's a really beautiful question. And like I was saying earlier on in our conversation, if you're going overseas, if you're going to Uganda or Brazil or Jordan or wherever, and you can learn a few words in their heart language,
Yeah.
gosh, it's so you can just see the smile. I see I see you're an American or I see you're whatever French, but I see that you took the time to learn a few words in my heart language,
Right.
and that helps us to it helps establish relationship, right? I mean,
Correct.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it really does.
The biggest issue I've discovered today is that in this country, we're adopting everyone's cultural beliefs, bringing them into the American ideological cultural beliefs, and it, eradicating a lot of our home based cultural beliefs, i.e., Christmas, the holiday seasons, and we're changing it for other cultures that are coming in. They don't do that in other countries. You celebrate their cultural days. That's the biggest issue I have with America. But once you go out this country, you have a Christmas. You have these holiday seasons
Yeah.
that are based in their culture. But
Right.
like I said again, the big issue I have today's world is we're changing our land to become suitable, assimilative for other cultures, but the other cultures never do change theirs.
Are you talking about those cultures changing once they're in the United States or in their
No, it's
original?
like, for example, we've eliminated Merry Christmas and we call it now Happy Holidays. Oh my God.
Okay.
I'm like,
Yeah.
I mean, come on, man. I mean, those
In some circles,
ideologies.
it's rude to wish someone a Merry Christmas now.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, those those lands are becoming, and those cultures are, their lands and culture has flourished, and they maintain their ideals, their beliefs, their faith, and their desires for their children. Even though, yes, like in Uganda, you do have witchcraft. That's been a part of their culture for centuries. It's nothing that's going to be eliminated because that's part of their belief system. It's embedded within their culture. Um, you go to the islands, i.e., Cuba, Haiti, even Puerto Rico. It's there. Go to South America. You have the Rosicrucians, and you also have, oh God, I forgot the other belief. But they have it there.
a lot.
It's embedded. Like in Mexico, you go and travel there. You look under the churches, and you still see the ancient symbols of their real belief. Um, these are things that people don't really get the chance to take note of or don't think of taking note of when they go to foreign nations. Then these people from the foreign nations come to the United States and they see Rome. I'm sorry, I gotta say it right. They see Rome. And the thing about the whole aspect of culture, religion, faith, and language is that they all go hand in hand. They have a presence and they show the cultural dynamics of each and every country, i.e., Philippines, Indonesia, same group, different cultures, separated by water. Even all the way to Japan. Let's go as far as there, and China, since it was a migration. Um, the ideologies are blending, but it shouldn't be a forced blend. I don't think.
Yeah. 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 If we can be who we are and let other people be who they are, then that's great. But I would say there's culturally, at least certainly in Brazil, there's an awful lot of influence of the U.S. there.
Oh
That was actually
yes.
my first job at that newspaper, was to take photographs because it was for the 4th of July newspaper.
Yeah,
So to take photographs around Rio that showed the influence of the U.S. in Rio, it was just everywhere. I mean, close your eyes and take a picture.
from the hotels to running toilets, flushable toilets, and for running water in the sink basins. Yeah, that the United States has given a lot of influence and a lot of, how can we say, we've economically tied Brazil to us in what ways.
Yeah.
We are tied,
Yeah.
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 For example, Santa Claus. We were actually kind of saddened. We lived in Santarém, in the
Santa
Amazon for a
Claus in
lot
the
of years.
heat.
For a lot of years, and the first, Betty, help me out here, but I think the first 5 or 6 years when Christmas came around, their tradition is Christmas Eve is a big celebration.
Right.
There's a big family dinner. There's fireworks. They have fireworks on Christmas Eve, and then Christmas Day. I think they exchange their gifts on Christmas Eve.
Right.
Christmas
Yes.
Day is just a very quiet kind
Not a
of.
biggie. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But about the 5th or 6th year we were there, Santa Claus came in, culturally invaded Santarém, right? Remember?
Right.
There was
Right.
no Santa Claus in the culture until about, I want to say 2005. Is that, I mean, I don't want to pin it down too much,
I
but
don't know. But
yeah. Anyway, so Santa Claus is an American creation, based off St. Nicholas, the story or tradition of St. Nicholas. But Yeah, is that a good thing? No.
Santa Claus and all that. Look, Santa Claus in 90-degree weather with high humidity.
Oh,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Santa Claus.
But we did because we missed home. We went around caroling door to door the first few years we were there, and people loved it. They didn't know what the heck we were doing. But
It was weird.
they loved it.
So my son was with us on the mission field at that time. He plays violin. He's a good musician. We went caroling, and we weirded out. Talk about culture shock. We did a reverse kind of culture shock, and we weirded out. Of course, they knew who we were by this time, but our neighbors did. He took his violin. These are like rough streets with, kind of a rough neighborhood, a barrio. Remember, Betty? He took his violin. Yeah. I took my guitar. We did put red and white.
Put Santa hats on.
And we went caroling, and we opened. Their eyes popped wide, and but it's what I was saying again about this thing of grace. So is there judgment in that moment, or is there condemnation? No, I mean, they're weirded out for sure, but then there's like, especially among the Brazilians, this propensity or willingness to smile, right, Betty? Right.
Yeah.
Oh, they're weird. We knew they were weird.
Let you be you.
Well, yeah, but they did not, and they freaked out maybe a little bit, but they're so generally so full of grace and willingness to accept you, and they understood it was Christmas. And some of the carol tunes, Silent Night, for example, are known in some of the old carols are known around the world in other languages.
Right.
Yeah. So,
but Silent Night really makes no sense in Brazil.
No, it
it's
doesn't.
not a silent night.
No.
Yeah, it's actually fireworks.
Fireworks.
And party and dancing and music. Yes.
Right. That's right. We'd get fireworks at 5:00 in the morning on Children's Day every year. Like, oh.
Yeah, right.
But I mean, for Brazil, especially in Rio and other areas, major cities areas, I mean, you're right. They can be very dangerous. And that's one thing that people that travel do not recognize. And Uganda, my God, I even put my shields up when I think of, if I had to go to Uganda today, what would I carry? I think I carry every weapon that we can get in the United States with me, because that place is off the chain. It's.
I have to. Can I share a quick story about
please.
Danger in Uganda? We were traveling from, I can't remember what city, to Kampala in a van that this guy had, and I had not. I knew it was so many miles, and it didn't occur to me it was going to be like 4 hours because the traffic was horrible. So I needed to go to the bathroom, and we were going through neighborhoods that there was just no way that we could stop the van, and I'm starting to panic. Finally, we got to where there was a supermarket, and I said, "Can I get off here?" And the driver got out. His friend was the guard at the supermarket. He had an automatic weapon on him. Mm-hmm. He told him I need, and he said, "You can go with him. You'll be safe walking through the supermarket to get to the bathroom." Okay, I needed an armed guard to go through the supermarket.
Yeah. I remember of Uganda, they used to have the bucket in the bus.
Bucket in the bus. There you go.
Yeah. Could have used that.
In a minute.
Yeah.
And you're right. Traffic is terrible. I mean, it's terrible. Yeah. But I mean, I could say the culture is beautiful. The people are wonderful. And the crime in both nations can be ridiculous. And it's due to, as you said, those, I just go ahead and use the word tyrants running the nation, letting it just go the way they want it to go.
That's exactly right. Betty, I didn't go on that trip, but when she got back, she said, okay, the government there is, let's be honest, is extremely corrupt, and it's impoverishing its people, okay, through its greed and its policies. But the people are thinking, this is not so bad because we remember Big Daddy Amin.
Oh, Papa Doc,
Okay,
Baby Doc.
so
Yeah.
Big Daddy and Mean, when you're talking about villains or tyrants, so the older generations especially say, okay, our present government is corrupt and impoverishing us in various ways, but he's better. They are better than Big Daddy.
There are
So
also
yeah,
the dictators. This is interesting. The dictators, the heavy-handed dictators, also keep the warring between tribes down. So a lot of people are happy about whatever, be as oppressive as you want to, because we can't live with all this infighting,
tribal warfare.
tribal
Right.
warfare.
Yes.
So
Right.
it's hard from our
So
point of view to say, oh, well, that's okay, because it's just not our frame of reference.
Well, a lot of the tribal warfare is due to the split of the nation of Uganda during the time of World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And they did not have their cousins on the other side when they made the line through the country or the borders.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
with that, I mean, a lot of the effects of World War II, even in Brazil, still exist today. And the countries would
Yeah.
have been so much better if, quote unquote, the free world had kept their hands out of the joyful nations that they were. Because they did get along with each other. They did have relationships amongst the tribes, even in Brazil, as well as Uganda and countries in Africa. I think that's World War II was the most corrupt thing in the world for when it comes to these nations because of the division. I mean, you take this part of the land, you take this part of the land, and
Right.
and you separate the cousins, you separate the families, you separate it, you cross this border, you get killed. It doesn't, and it was almost as bad as the story of when they talk about the when Italy invaded Ethiopia. Um, I remember seeing videos of that when the Italian tanks were rolling and against the Ethiopians who were fighting with spears and bow and arrows. I mean,
Wow.
what a war,
Wow.
huh? A real war, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
But I mean, outside of that, the food is dynamic in those countries. Dynamic. Culturally, the people are very happy and they are very willing to help. Like you said, you have to want to take the initiative and learn the language and understand the people. I mean, a lot of people. I went on the Experiment in International Living back in '84. And yeah,
That's how I got started too.
oh, hey, girl, what's
Yeah.
up? Yeah. And
We were hosts. I didn't go. We
y'all
They
that's how I
hosted.
got.
I,
Yeah.
They hosted. Yeah.
yeah, I went to these countries as part of the Experiment International Living. Yes, I'm a super traveler there, and did my reports, and I loved it. And I got to see this the serpent climb up the Temple of the Moon, and I got the chance to climb them in Mexico. I used to go to La Tajín to see the flyers. I mean, these things, you can see the flyers, but you can't go to the temples anymore. You can't climb them anymore. I climbed up. I have pictures of that. Yeah, the young me. Don't start, Rowena. The young me. Yeah, I would run up those stairs. I mean, those stairs are little short, little tiny steps. Half my foot size. Let's be nice. But the people are always the natives that they called, they're of the land are so willing to teach you about their culture. I suggest anyone and everyone not only to read my man Don Best's book. I gotta say it. Read his book because from what my man told me, it was very influential in him and his wanting to learn more about the culture of Brazil and influenced him to do some research into UFOs and the markings and cave drawings they have in the Amazon, which is totally will blow your mind. He has some of those to offer, but as well as in Uganda, where they do talk about a lot of the mystiques and paranormal, and I mean, paranormal. My God, that culture is truly paranormal. If you're looking for learning about anything in their culture, as I say, their culture is pretty paranormal if you really think about it. No, they talk about ghosts a lot, the spirits of their people. Um, it's all weaved in their culture.
Mm.
And that's one thing that shocked me about Uganda and also Ethiopia as well. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just got you just brain blasted me today. It made me want to think, and I got a
Cool.
cold. And look, and I got a cold, and I love this show. I love it. All right, back to Rowena.
All right. Well, I want to thank both of you for being on the show today. Thank you, Don. Thank
Yeah.
you, Betty.
Thank you.
Thank you, Odin. You guys are wonderful. I'd like, I know it looks backward. I'm not sure if it looks backwards or you can even see this, but I have your book, The Gravedigger's Dream. It's available on Amazon. Go and pick it up by Don Best. If you want to learn more about the Amazon and Brazil and the culture, and one of the best literary minds of the century in his writing, Don.
Thank you.
So thank you for being on the show. Thank you for watching Don't Be Cinderella. Create your own future
Mhm.
and live happily ever after.
Thank you very much.
Amen.